Hello everyone, how you going? And welcome to 25 funny differences between Canadians and Americans. Now everyone knows that the North American grouping is just very similar, but let's see how they're different.
Canada and the US have somewhat of a love-hate relationship. It's a sibling rivalry that goes back centuries. So what exactly are the differences between the two? Today, we're going to take a look at how the longest unprotected border in the world has defined North America. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 funny differences between Canadians and Americans.
25.
Canadians tend to trust authority, whereas Americans are suspicious of it. This goes back to the fact that the Canadians remained loyal to the crown, while America showed King George the door.
Now look, I'm not going to pretend to be some amazing history buff that can tell you the exact day that happened, but I do know, because you can still see in the current day ties that that's just a general thing. I mean, I feel like in trusting authorities, a lot of different factors can come into it, just how the country gets bred culturally, but I can understand that if one is going, I don't really want you, and the other one's going, yeah, no worries, come on, just stay with us.
24.
Canadians bond over hockey. Americans bond over football. In general, Canadians also put less emphasis on sports.
23.
Canadians spend a lot of time comparing themselves to the US. Americans don't think about Canada very often at all. Actually, almost never.
Well, that is certainly true, but I don't know if Canadians spend that much time thinking about the US. I think they spend a lot of their time telling people that they're not from the USA, and if they do spend their time thinking about the US, I think they spend it thinking that they're better than the US, which, hey, there's plenty of reasons for each country to be better than one another. And then in terms of sports, I can definitely say that ice hockey is absolutely the pinnacle when it comes to Canada, but I wouldn't have thought that football, being American football, would have been the soul of sport. And especially for him to say that Canadians aren't into sport that much, I think that's taking it too far, because we can all know and see how the cult following of ice hockey is just insane, let alone the other sports like baseball. Obviously both countries share that, and soccer or football, whatever you want to call it, like they're growing in popularity bigger than anything.
22.
Some parts of Canada sell milk in bags. Bagged milk would be highly suspicious in the US.
Yeah, and anywhere
totally
else.
drink it.
And look, I've seen the arguments for and I've seen the arguments against, both in videos and in the comments, and I still just don't understand how it's a more efficient method of transportation, because a squared off shape is always going to be the most efficient to pack, and so if you're putting it in a bag, then you just can't do that. And the thing that gets me the most is, even though people have said that you break it down into smaller bags so you don't have to use it all at once, I still don't get how you seal it up so then you don't just have off milk within, I don't know, 2 hours or a day.
The US sees itself as a melting pot. That was a good restaurant. While Canada sees itself as a mosaic.
Yes.
The difference is very slight, but basically in the US, there's more mixing and blending between immigrant cultures, while in Canada, immigrants tend to keep more of their language and traditions rather than mix with others.
Now that is a point that has come up across multiple videos, and I was thinking about it last time going, why would that be? And I was going, it must just be down to a cultural thing. Maybe people are more reserved in themselves, and as such just keep to themselves a little bit more. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just about how the culture operates and how the cultures within a culture operate and mosaic together. But it's just so fascinating to me how these two countries that are realistically so similar, even though we're watching the differences, they are such similar countries, even especially in immigration. Really, it makes me wonder what Australia is, and even the UK, for instance, because are we melting pots or mosaics or something completely different?
Canadians have more of a tall poppy syndrome, which is a tendency to distrust or discredit anyone who stands out in a prominent position or wealth.
British, though.
In this sense, Canada is a lot more like Europe. Conformity is more encouraged in Canada than in the US. If America does well at anything, it's encouraging innovation and non-conformity.
19.
Canadians love their flag, but Americans seem to love their flag more. Seriously, nobody beats America at flags.
Oh yeah.
You can't beat Canadians at maple syrup, though.
Well, that is certainly the truth, because if you have ever been on Street View in the USA, you know that they're just everywhere. I mean, if you live in the USA, you'll also know, but just generally, comparing it to another country, you can just see that they're everywhere. You know, just kind of going down any random street, it'll be on every house, every second house, wherever it is, where I've never seen that in any other country. And yes, some of the flags are generally, I think, for the military families, and there's a lot of military families, but there's not that many military families. So I guess once again, it's just a cultural thing, you know. America is an extremely patriotic country, and in a similar vein, like he was saying with the tall poppy thing, and I said it was quite a British thing, and I truly believe that, because Australia has a massive amount of tall poppy syndrome, and so it is interesting to hear that Canada has it, because I can only assume they would take on some elements from the USA, loud and proud, but then at the same time, I guess just that melting pot of the UK coming in and just giving them a little bit of tall poppy syndrome.
Canadians put more emphasis on higher education. Actually, Canada puts more emphasis on it than any other country in the world. It leads the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, with 53% of the population having a college education. The OECD average is 32%.
Well, that is definitely interesting to hear because I've heard multiple times and from multiple sources that on one hand it's Canada and on one hand it's Australia. And so I guess we're just fighting for the same role. But every time I hear the statistics, it's just that one is blowing every other country in the world out of the water. And so I never understand which one's which. But like I was saying, if you're able to have a large proportion of the population being highly educated people, you're not doing too bad.
Canadians generally approve of their government. Americans hate and distrust theirs. This boils down to the fact that the Canadians see government as a good thing, while Americans see it as a necessary evil.
Right.
16.
Americans are more individualistic. This goes back to the Wild West mentality. The very word Canada, on the other hand, is derived from a local Iroquoian word for village.
Yeah.
Canadians are more communally minded.
Well, I guess both of these, as well as some of the other ones that he's mentioned, are coming back to the same point about the Canada's roots versus America's roots. Because the more I see of this, the more apparent the nice guy Canadian stereotype comes into it, because I can see that these aren't people of conflict, you know? And for better or worse, they just aren't as outgoing or as outspoken as USA people.
Canada's right wing is America's left wing. In the political
Okay.
sense, Canadian politics tend to be more liberal. This doesn't mean that Canada doesn't have conservative politics. It certainly does. The political system is a lot less polarized, however, and doesn't pull to the extremes as much. It has 5 primary political parties.
Wow. I guess he's comparing that to the USA having 2, is that correct? I don't know what you would say Australia has. Would it have 2 or would it have 5 or more? Because we have 2 major parties, but then that's kind of 3 because one's a coalition and then it just filters down from there into slightly smaller ones as well. It gets really complicated really fast. And like I was saying with history, I can't exactly call myself an expert, so I'm just not going to dive into that one. But that's interesting that they have, well, he said it's switched around. I mean, he didn't exactly elaborate, but I wonder if that means like left is right and right is left, or if that just means they're generally more condensed than each other.
Both Americans and Canadians think they're more free. In Canada,
Right.
this is due to more progressive policies. In the US, it's due to lack of government policies.
Oh, that is such a weird thing to think about, the fact that both countries believe that they are more free. I mean, it makes sense, especially with between those two, because I guess people would just move if they weren't too happy. But as he said, once again, it comes back to uniformity in Canada just being, okay, we believe all of these set of rules is what we should be governed by, where the USA just goes, nah, I want no rules, that is my freedom.
Americans are more confrontational.
Right, yes.
Not
of
necessarily in a bad way, but Canadians are more likely to just hold everything in and let it stew.
course. Once again.
Or apologize.
12.
Canadians pretend Canada has no problems. America pretends the US just has quirks.
Oh, that's one way to put it. I feel like that's exactly what you say when you just can't really explain the problem or you don't really want to address it. You go, oh, it's a feature, it's a quirk, whatever it may be. And maybe that comes back to being very patriotic about your country and going, no, we don't have any problems. We're the most free country in the world. But I feel like you have to recognize that you got something going on.
Canadians don't get to experience the joys of Pandora and Spotify due to licensing restrictions.
Spotify? Wait, at all? I mean, Australia doesn't have Pandora either, even though I think I've heard about it just being in cars and stuff, but do they not have Spotify, or is he just saying some things are limited? Because if they don't have Spotify, especially when was this made? In 2017? Okay, maybe they didn't, I don't know. I don't know when Australia got it. No, they surely would have. In 2017?
Although Canadians do feel quite a bit of connection with their province/city, Americans identify much more with their state than they do with the country as a whole, except for
Yeah,
Quebec,
true.
Canada's Texas.
Well, I've never heard that comparison be made before between Texas and Quebec. Are you serious? That's very surprising to me. But thinking about it, it is very true that people from the USA are very state-bound and even city-bound within their states. You know, like I'm from Austin if you're from Texas. No, I'm from Houston, I'm from Texas. And so once again, we're just seeing how individualized the USA is between individuals themselves and then also state-bound and then just country-bound as well. There are multiple tiers to the entire system, but they just know who they are, and man, do they go after and stick to their guns there.
Canadians talk about the War of 1812 a lot. Americans aren't quite sure what that is. Boston
Right.
Tea Party, anyone?
8.
Canadians are more passive-aggressive. A good example of this would be tribalism and all of its derivatives. While it's more overt in the US, that doesn't mean it's any less in Canada. It just
Right.
comes out in a more backhanded fashion.
And once again, we are coming back to people being more reserved and not wanting to cause conflict. It's as simple as that. I feel as though that just sums up the two countries completely. You draw a line down the middle, or I guess you draw it horizontally because of the 49th parallel, and you go, okay, all of you to the south, you were just going to be outgoing, a little bit louder, a little bit more patriotic and individualized, and everyone to the north just be nice and calm and not want to cause conflict. You know, we're all in this together. And I don't think that you can just straight outright say that one is better than the other, because they're just different, and that's fine. That's what two countries are all about.
Canadians brag about how cold it is, while Americans brag about how warm it is. Unless you live in Minnesota, then you're basically Canadian.
Or Boston or something
6.
like that. Ugh.
Americans are much more polarized on almost everything. But
Once
then
again.
again, there are more people in just California than all of Canada, so it makes sense that Canadians would be more unified.
5,
In the US, talking about American politics is taboo, but in Canada, talking about American politics is a national pastime.
That is certainly an interesting difference, and that's just because you can easily talk about things that just don't really concern you. I mean, I guess US politics kind of concern everyone, you know, when you have these global superpowers, let's say China, the USA, Russia, all of these things definitely affect the entire world. But from what I've heard and what I've seen, I think Canada's perspective on USA politics is just more just joking about it from across the fence. And I can't say that Australia isn't also guilty of this, because we definitely do it, and I feel like every country probably does it to some extent, just looking at another country, because it's easy. You just go, oh, look at the shambles that it is over there. Our country's just going swimmingly. Generally, it's just when another country's having an election, there's a whole bunch of turmoil, and you're generally not having an election at the same time.
Canadians are more likely to take off their shoes in the house. Of course, this depends on location,
What
but
a
in many parts of the
random-
US, walking with shoes in the house is acceptable.
Right.
It is a cowboy influence.
3,
That's so random to cut to. We went straight from politics and people being unified and agreeable straight into shoes being taken off in a house.
Canadians think Canada is completely different from the US. Americans, on the other hand, don't notice much of a difference between the two countries.
They're one and the
As a
same,
note,
they claim
from a
it.
European perspective, any differences will seem a bit overstated.
Right.
2,
yes.
Americans have it easier when it comes to shopping online. In Canada, many stores don't offer online shopping, and many of them don't even have a website to begin with.
I mean, look, there have been a few things over the last 5 years that have happened that have kind of forced a lot of businesses to go online and maybe just go online solely. And so I would like to hear a few more Canadian perspectives on this, because maybe people go, what are you talking about? It's always been very simple. It's always been there, and now it's just more. It's just the fact that we aren't the USA and we haven't gone overboard on every single product we could ever sell. Because to be honest, given the proximity to the USA, I feel as though if Canada doesn't have online shopping, Australia doesn't even have internet access yet. But here we go. Number one, what is it going to be about, you ask? I don't know, but I can only assume probably something to do with individualism.
Canada has two official languages on a national level, English and
course.
French. Americans have no official
I was
language on
gonna
a
say
national
one
level.
or zero.
Each
It is
state
zero.
decides whether or not to adopt English as an official language.
Wow. Oh, so it's state-based. Okay, then. I guess that makes sense, but I always forget how individualized, again, like I said, individualism, but how individualized every single state is. I mean, I guess it makes sense because it is literally in the name, the United States of America, as though every single state is its own country and they've unified together. And so I wonder if there's ever been an attempt to unify the states even more, you know, make it kind of an entire country, even though it is a country, but just make everything, instead of being the United States of America, you say some random word. But hey, this video definitely did a good job of just raising a couple of issues or a couple of talking points that I otherwise wouldn't have thought about, you know? I mean, we have little things like Pandora and Spotify, but then you also have big things, like you said, with politics being swapped over or more conservative and individualized and whatever you want to call it. There are so many words to describe both countries. And so to have something like that, you definitely have to have things in common. But it's also just interesting to hear just how the roots of these two countries, obviously they're both British colonies originally, but then how they diverge. And I guess you also have the French history in Canada and just all these different individual things that come into just to create these two countries that are very similar, but also clearly have their differences. And so it's amazing how things can in the end just boil down to a couple of differences, but they make all the difference. And like I always say, that's fine. That's actually great, because that's what gives us different countries. And that's why people can be proud and just move around if they really want to, but otherwise just go, yes, this is where I love to live because of all these reasons. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I'm going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to the YouTube algorithm things down below. Also, if this is the first video of mine that you're watching, then make sure to go check out any other ones I've done. Also, make sure to go check out the original video down in the description below, or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.